when I used to have surgeries in my neck, and my mum would come and visit
Mhm.
at the hospital, she'd be having a full blown conversation with me, knowing full well I couldn't talk back. But
On
yep,
purpose.
subconsciously I'll be like, oh, I'll be talking, like nothing's coming out. I'm like, ah, get me a pen, and I had to write everything out. So, not taken away from people that have to read Braille, but I completely
Mhm.
understand when you don't have a part of you that can't communicate. It's very,
Yeah.
that's when you realize how important our body is, no matter what part of your
Yeah.
body you miss.
Nana, welcome to Disabled and Proud. How are you
I'm good,
today?
thank you.
Oh, I'm so looking forward to this chat because I feel like a lot is going to be covered. And I always learn something when I do these pods. So that makes me super excited.
I'm sure I'll teach you a lot.
I know, I'm looking forward to
Yeah.
it. So, everybody who listens to this podcast, everybody who knows anything about this podcast knows that my first question is always, how do you refer to your disability?
As a unique entity. I don't
Mm-hmm.
see it as a disability. Reason being,
Mm-hmm.
when you say that this, it sounds like discord, disconnect. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not disconnected. I'm fully functioning. Just have a unique way of
Mm-hmm.
living.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, isn't it? Because so many people have that train of thought where because disability starts with that start of dis, it's bad and it's something that we shouldn't, accept or celebrate or talk about or we have like a different spin on it. But equally in saying that we're all allowed to relate to ourselves completely
Yeah,
individually, and it's about how you best describe what's going on with your body and how things work for
yeah.
you, which is great. So speaking of that, what was childhood like for you growing up with your disability or your unique perspective in life?
Uh, it. I felt like I was living somebody else's life because
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't necessarily told what my barrier was. I knew I was
Mm-hmm.
different from everybody else. I knew I had a barrier, but my parents never explained to me what it was. So it's until I went to
Mm-hmm.
primary school, I noticed that during the winter period I was put indoors and my friends could run around,
Mm-hmm.
have snotty noses, but I couldn't. Um,
Yeah.
it's until I started to misbehave in school where the teachers called my
Mm-hmm.
mum and my parents in, and it was established, okay, he's misbehaving. Maybe we need to explain to him why we take him indoors. And then that's when I was
Mm-hmm.
told, oh, you've got a trachea, you can't go outside, you can't go outside um, because you get chest infections and it's more severe than
Yeah.
everybody else. So up until the age of 6, 7, I was kind of clueless to having a
Mm-hmm.
disability.
Wow.
Mm,
And that's young as
yeah,
well. And and to have it, I mean, how old were you when you got a trach?
since birth, since birth.
Oh wow, so that was like 6, 7 years of your life, and you're like, this is how everybody else
Yep.
is. And then suddenly you're like, okay, stop.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Well,
That must have been quite an interesting experience for you to be like, oh, okay, like I knew there was
yeah,
something, but I didn't know what that something
yeah.
was. And when you were given your explanation, did you feel, obviously, like you were still really young, so it's really hard to judge, but did you feel like you've been given an answer as to why things were the way they were for you?
Um, my mind was young at the time. I was like, okay, cool,
Yeah.
because I used to watch Turtles when I was younger, thinking, yeah, I'm a superhero, but I didn't really digest that. I've actually got plastic
Mm-hmm.
in my neck. I've actually got something wrong with
Yeah.
my breathing. It never really
Yeah.
sank in till I was in my teens.
Hmm. And being a teenager is a pain in the ass for everyone.
Yep. Um,
Like,
Teen World was not great for me.
yeah, this is the thing, right? I genuinely couldn't be paid enough money to go back to being a teenager. Like, if someone said to me, here is £10 million, but you've got to be a teenager from the ages of 13 to 18
Yeah.
again, I wouldn't do it. You genuinely
No.
couldn't pay me
No.
enough. And particularly when we're thinking about disability and how the world is different for us
Yep.
anyway. But when we're thinking about those really formative
Hmm.
years, having a disability like thrown in the mix just makes it
Yeah.
harder. And particularly when it's something that can be visually seen, like, and this is, it's very different between being physically disabled and invisibly
Hmm.
disabled, because the two are, do you know what, the two are both, they're both their own separate
Yeah.
beasts, and they are hard work. But when your body is physically changing anyway, and then there's something physically, like, quote unquote, not the same as everybody
Yeah.
else, and you can see it,
Hmm.
and you know what teenagers are like, they like to pick out the
Yeah.
oddities. It can be really difficult, and really a really hard
Of course.
time. And I completely understand what you say when you're like, it just wasn't a good experience for me,
Yeah.
like, it just wasn't fun.
Because your mind's battling your image, and then you've got, on
Hmm.
top of that, you got your disability, and then on top of that, you're thinking about what other people think of you.
Yeah, yeah,
So it's like in different layers.
so true. Yeah, like an onion,
Yeah.
we're all Shrek,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
And actually, when we're thinking about disability and we're thinking about the scholastic system, did you feel like you were supported when you were at school?
Oh, yeah, you're bringing it all out of me today. Um, no, because I
Hmm.
had periods of my education where I sat at home because the
Yeah,
education or the local authority at the time didn't understand my barrier, so they didn't
yeah.
know how to take care of me. If anything
Hmm.
happened, who was on hand, whether they were first aid trained. It was a big risk for that local authority at the time. Um,
Hmm.
but insane risk, they should be risk avert, so they should be prepared for change.
Yeah.
But I'm an 80s baby, grew up in the 90s, and the 90s wasn't disability friendly.
Hmm.
Um, so it was a lot. Did the school really support me? My mama took it fast, so it was kind of forced.
Yeah.
Um, and even into my teens, GCSE periods, there was another
Hmm.
period where I moved borough, and then we had to start the
Okay.
whole statement. At the time, it was called a statement over again, and that took another 2 years
Hmm.
of my life staying at home because they
Wow.
couldn't decide who was funding what, and in their mind, I should have gone to a sense school because I have a disability. Yeah.
So the links between, like, SEN schools and mainstream education, I totally understand the need, like, the need for them. I can completely understand that. I used to work in
Hmm.
one. But it's interesting to me when we separate who needs to go into what schooling based on physical disability, because what you find is that SEN schools are amazing for kids who have some form of learning or cognition
Hmm.
disability. It's great for them because the classroom education in a mainstream school is not set up for the support that they
Hmm.
need. But someone like yourself who has a has a trach, and yet they thought that it would be the answer to send you to an SEN school because of that
Yeah. Oh,
reason.
I ain't told you what I done because they were arguing with my mom a lot, and my mom was like,
Mm-hmm.
"Okay, cool, I'll give in. You want him to go to a sense school? Let him go." And when I went,
Uh-huh.
yeah, for someone like me who was very active, and there was a lot
Yeah.
of kids sitting in specialized chairs because they couldn't move. I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
used to that. I was wondering, according to my mum, I was wondering why they weren't moving, why because some of them couldn't talk.
Yeah.
And apparently I put one on the floor and dragged them because I got frustrated that they weren't talking to
Yeah.
me. So that really cottoned on of the local authority. But if
Mm.
that didn't happen, I would have been stuck in a SEND school.
Yeah. And again, it's you know what it all comes down to? It just comes down to being able to have awkward
Yeah,
conversation and being uncomfortable in awkward
yeah.
conversation to be like, do you know what, we don't know how to support you. How can we best support
Hmm.
you? Because I bet that conversation would have gone so much more differently than okay, so we don't know how to support you, but we're just gonna pile you off here in this pile because we think that that's where you're suited best.
I think back then, conversations were never had with the individual. It was had with a
Yeah.
parent, and then the individual was just
Hmm.
in their own little world and told, yep, this is going to happen, that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And it was all medical model based rather than social.
Yeah. And there's so much to be said in that because the medical model fails on so many
Yeah,
levels and it fails so many people, like literally all
of
the
course.
time. like when we think of the medical model, I always like to think that the medical model basically promotes the idea that disability is something that is
Yeah,
broken and you need to
you
be
need to be
fixed.
fixed. Yeah.
And and like I don't need to be fixed. I don't need another hand. Like that is if I woke up
Hmm.
tomorrow with another hand, I would not know how to navigate this world. And
Mm,
it would be alien. That would be for me, it would be more disabling to wake up tomorrow with another hand than to not have it.
ye- ah,
Because I don't know how to navigate this world without
yeah.
it. And I wonder if the same would be the same for you. Like, don't get me wrong, it might be more convenient. Sure, that'd be great. I love convenience. But I don't actually know how to navigate the world as if I didn't have a
I
disability.
mean, growing up, I had three different occasions where they wanted to seal my neck completely. One decision was made by my parents, which actually happened, and then
Hmm.
everything disintegrated, and I was struggling for dear life
Hmm.
to breathe.
Hmm.
And then when I was in my teens, they suggested it again that because I'm still growing, I've got time for my structure to grow. I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
I preferred the tube, and
Yeah.
the consultants at the time never understood why. They gave me an option
Yeah.
to, in their eyes, quote unquote, be normal, and I want to
Yeah.
stick with being, in their eyes, medical
Yeah.
modernized or however they
Yeah.
see it. But I
Yeah.
felt my quality of life having the tube was better than fussing around and experimenting with a very delicate area that
Yeah.
had a 90% chance of collapsing again.
Wow. But I love that. Do you know why? Because it's like you've chosen like
Yeah,
yourself above any medical model, above anything that social like, society has told you. You've not given in to that societal pressure and you've actually just been like, no, I know myself the best and actually I'm gonna stay the way that I
yeah,
am because I trust it.
yeah. Because even my parents got obsessed. They were doing research. Oh, there's a person in America. I was I was like, no. Like, how old was I? I think 15. Yeah, I was like, no.
Hmm.
I knew in my mind I was much more happy with the tube.
Yeah. Actually, this like moves on quite nicely to when we're thinking about school and what we're going to do after school in terms of like our jobs and our
Yeah.
careers. Those who aren't disabled don't tend to take in like doesn't they don't have to worry about their disability being a part of their
Hmm.
career or having to think about that.
Hmm.
And I was wondering, how has your disability or the way that you view the world, how has that impacted your career and what you do now?
Um, I knew I didn't have a voice, as in my voice didn't really project.
Hmm.
So I ended up getting a job where you have to talk a lot. I got into sales. I got into sales. My first job was working for Phones for You, and
Hmm.
that really made me confident in talking to random people about
Mhm.
phones, but it also gave me the
Yeah.
skill to exercise my voice and project myself. How did
Mhm.
that job indirectly guide me in my career? It made me want to help people. I liked talking a
Mhm.
lot. My voice was a bit more um, stronger than it is now, so
Mhm.
I could talk without gasping for air. Um,
Mhm.
and it led me into public sector. So I
Yeah.
started off in DWP, job center, working with the public, assisting with their benefits. Um,
Mhm.
moved over to the tax office, even though I don't like the tax man.
Who does like the tax man? Let's be really honest. Like, who does? I
um,
don't.
worked there for 7 months, and then I moved on to local authority, where it focused
Mhm.
on disabled people getting into employment, and that
Mhm.
really touched the core with me. I
Mhm.
I sometimes felt um what's the word, of an imposter. Reason being, I never struggled for
Mhm.
employment, but
Yeah.
I know people with various disabilities do struggle. Um, so I think
Yeah.
Phones for You gave me that stepping stone to elevate myself and be confident with my disability.
Yeah. And I think what you just said about feeling like an imposter because you'd never struggled with
Mhm.
employment and yet you were helping disabled people. Oh gosh, my voice has gone a little bit funny. There we go. I'm going to have such fun listening back to this, I can tell you. But what you said actually about working somewhere where you're helping disabled people who are struggling getting employment, even though you yourself are a disabled individual who has never struggled with
Mhm.
employment, it's a really important thing to mention because there is almost like that
Yeah,
guilt, and it's like a collective guilt because even though you're part of this community, you're not having those
yeah,
problems, but you can totally understand those
yeah,
problems. And it's a really interesting one to balance because on the one hand, you don't know what it's like, but
yeah.
on the other hand, you know what it's like to be a disabled individual, and it's very, very hard to balance. And working with people, were there things that you learn along the way, even
Mhm.
about like yourself?
Yeah,
So when you're talking about using your
yeah.
voice and how it was stronger, is this because you're like using the muscle more?
Okay.
And like how does this all work? I'm really intrigued, and if you're able to explain, that would be
Yeah. So
amazing.
so silly me. I should have explained what my disability was, how I got it, why the voice is the way it is. Right. So I was born 26 weeks early,
Mm-hmm.
narrow airway at birth. So my
Mm-hmm.
airways were kind of like bunched up.
Oh, okay.
Um, they had to widen it, put a tube in it, and enable that the vocal cords were there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, growing up, it was a bit weak, so I had to have a lot of speech therapy to
Yeah.
strengthen my vocal cords. Um, and then as time went by, my voice did get kind of strong. Um, however, in 2010, my airway shrank on
Mm-hmm.
itself.
Oh,
Yep,
wow.
I started to cough, clots, all types of things. Yep, and they realized that my airway was re-shrinking on itself. And by
Uh-huh.
then I was what, 24. Um, so they reopened it, but in them doing that, messing around with my vocal cords, it's weakened my vocal cords.
Yeah.
So I've noticed within myself over the years, when I talk, I lose kind of air kind of quickly. It's not like when I
Mm-hmm.
was in my early 20s where I could talk for yonks and I'd be fine.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
So the massive impact was being born with a narrow airway. It all stemmed from it being narrow.
Yeah. It's like bodies are so
Mm,
fascinating in terms of like what they want to do and what we need them
yeah,
to do, because sometimes the two just don't add
yeah,
up. And it is very much a case of sometimes you're fighting against your body. And I wonder if you ever had an experience like that where you just feel like you've been fighting against your own rhythm and your own system.
yeah. When I used to have surgeries in my neck, and my mum would come and visit
Hmm.
at the hospital, and she'd be having a full blown conversation with me, knowing full well I couldn't talk back. But
Just doing it on
yep,
purpose.
subconsciously I'll be like, oh, I'll be talking, like nothing's coming out. I'm like, get me a pen, and I had to write everything out. Um, so not taking away from people that have to read braille, but I completely
Hmm.
understand when you don't have a part of you that can't communicate. It's very
Yeah,
That's when you realize how important our body is, no matter what part of your
yeah,
body you miss.
yeah, for sure, for sure. It's really interesting when we're thinking about like how we communicate, because disability and
Yeah,
communication sometimes don't actually go hand in hand, because it can be really difficult to communicate your needs and what access needs that you have, and being able to do that is a real luxury, and I'm very, very aware of
yeah,
that. But when it comes to like for you, for example, like the voice is so important when it comes to
hmm
communicating. Have you ever had that moment where you've been sat in a room and you just think nobody in here is listening to what I have to say
Oh, that
just because I sound different?
oh that happens all the time. Yeah, that
Yeah.
happens all the time. Where I'll either say something and it's like they've heard me mumbling, but
Mm-hmm.
they're not quite registering that I'm talking, or
Yeah.
I say something and it's completely glazed because my voice isn't projecting
Yeah.
strong enough for the sound to echo across that I'm making a contribution. So sometimes I'm having to shout so I'm heard, but
Mm-hmm.
then in the aspect of a corporate world or in in community in general, it's seen as
Mm-hmm.
rude. But then no one realizes why I'm doing it.
Yeah. That's so true, isn't it? Actually, like sometimes you might just have to almost shout and
Yeah,
scream, but it's because you don't have the other option, and it's not from a place
yeah.
of rudeness. And these are things. This is what I love about this podcast. Okay, like I'm getting really excited. Is that these are things that we don't actually think about. Like for me, it's not a thought that would have crossed my mind, but it should be a thought that's crossed my mind. That actually sometimes some people's best communication is
Yeah,
screaming, and like isn't that like being able to have these conversations and learn from
yeah,
them, I think is just so valuable, because I've learned already that that might be the
yeah.
case, but I just get so excited and I love it. So I like to ask everyone if they have a piece of advice for a younger version of themselves.
I think the advice I'd give my younger self is don't be afraid, ask questions,
Mm-hmm.
and if you do notice there's something not quite right, go with your instincts. It's not quite right, and
Mm-hmm.
ask the question. I think growing up, I was partly, that's how I see it from my lens, that I was partly to blame for the toll accepting I was disabled took on me because I never asked questions.
Yeah.
Um, Obviously, I had parents who didn't quite know how to tackle that uncomfortable conversation.
Yeah.
And obviously, the era that I was in the 90s wasn't kind to disabled people. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I think if I was to be in that era again, I would be very forthcoming and wanting to know why am I like this? What can I do to um, progress myself and make people feel comfortable around me? But I wouldn't want to make people feel comfortable for comfortable sake. I think you have to be uncomfortable to be comfortable. So it'd be me teaching them how to accept what I have and who I am.
Yeah. Yeah, and I honestly love what you've just said about not making people comfortable for being
Yeah.
comfortable, but actually because they need to learn
Yes.
something. And part of that learning process is being
Hmm.
uncomfortable. And like I'm a massive believer, like it's called growing pains for a
Yeah.
reason.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like and and like the first time that you ever went to walk, you probably fell on
Of
your butt.
course.
I don't know one single baby that has got up and walked and then been walking for the rest of their life. It doesn't work like that,
Yeah.
right? We do have to have these uncomfortable conversations, and something that you've said that I would like to ask about is that you've said a couple of times that the 90s just wasn't kind to disabled
Hmm.
people. Have you noticed a difference as time has gone on in the perception of disabled people during your life?
We're more commercial now. We're more palatable
Mm-hmm.
to the media.
Yeah.
Um, can I use the word tokenism? Is that the right word? I think I don't think a lot has progressed. I think now,
Mm-hmm.
because the buzzword of EDI is being flung around, we're being put in a position where, okay, we have to tick this box. So we have to accept you. But if we had our own way, would we? Don't know. I can't talk for others, but from what I can see, I don't think so. So we have moved the needle a little bit, but not as much as it really should be.
Yeah. I think it's really important to have that like conversation because like I wasn't born in the 90s, so I don't know what life was
Mhm.
like. And and the fact that we've moved the needle a little bit needs to be celebrated, but as you're right, like it's not anywhere where it
Yeah,
should be. And being able to say that is
yeah,
okay. Being able to be like, do you know what? We things have maybe slightly improved, but actually they're not quite where they should be, and they're not quite where they
mhm,
are, and we need to progress.
yeah,
That is an okay thing to
mhm,
say. It's not defeatist because there's a big difference in being
yeah,
defeatist and being
of course.
realistic. And it's lovely to hear that as well because I think sometimes, particularly when we're talking about disability and EDI, and it can be really painted with this like hyper
Mhm,
positivity that sometimes just doesn't
yeah,
exist. And actually, you've got to be a bit more truthful about it and be like, actually, do you know what? Things could be a damn sight better than what they
of
are
course.
now. And everybody in this room is contributing to that. So, joke's on you.
Yeah, that's true. uh,
So, through hardship, I was wondering, is there a particular positive trait that you have noticed about yourself that, you're actually really proud of?
I think through hardship, I thrive through hardship. So I will still go
Mm-hmm.
through a burning house if it means I get to my end goal. Um,
Yeah.
I don't allow someone's negativity towards how I look or how I sound to determine how I walk through life. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Before I was a person who was very reserved, and I would take the negatives. But I think when I grew up,
Yeah.
I thought enough was enough. You either
Mm-hmm.
like me for who I am or you lump it. So
Yeah.
it's that attitude of resilience. I know we use that word loosely nowadays, but resilience in the sense that I will live my life whether you dislike me or not, and I'll continue living my
Mm-hmm.
life whether you're in it or whether you're out of it. Nothing's gonna stop me being who I am.
Yeah, for sure. I would love to know, and I wonder if there are many or not. I would love to know if you get asked some really bizarre questions about your disability. Because we all get asked like the weird questions,
Yeah,
right? The weird people in the street who come up to us and be like, "Oh, like I'll pray for you." Me and my God have got not got the same as you and your God.
yeah.
You do you. But I was wondering, What are the weird questions that you get about your disability?
Okay, two questions I get asked on a regular. Can you eat? Where does the food? How does the food go down your neck? Does it hurt?
Okay.
Second question: can you be intimate? I'm like, what?
Oh God, people are obsessed with disability and
Yeah,
sex. I swear to God.
yeah,
But that is like, it's so. I love people, right? Because people are
yeah,
fascinating. But I love how other people think that it's okay to ask disabled people these
yeah.
questions because they can be so intrusive. But the food one, like that one for me is how am I still here if you couldn't, if you couldn't? Like how would I still be here?
Well, I guess oxygen's my food, and when it rains, that's my drinking water.
Oh my God, can you imagine going outside and be like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy it rained today. Today I get to survive another one.
Yeah. Um, I think I can understand why they would ask me that question because they probably seen people with tracheas who have to be fed through a tube. So in
Yeah.
their mind, they're thinking, "Oh, you've got trachea, that means you must be fed through a tube." But yeah,
Hmm.
I can understand that question. But the intimacy, sex bit, I'm like, I don't know about that.
You clearly don't know how this
Yeah.
works. Oh, that's so funny. And the reason I like to ask these questions because I like to just it almost makes them a bit more normal because I think when we experience them when we're by ourselves, they can be a bit like it can be a bit full on and in your face, and it's quite nice to know that other people get bizarre questions
Of
surrounding their
course.
disability for it. So, for example, people always ask me like, "Did a shark bite my arm off?" or like, "Can I cut my hands?" And I'm like, "Well, like obviously a shark didn't bite my arm off. We live in England. England is an island, and it would have been at front page news had a shark come to English shores and bit my arm off. And have you seen my face on the front page news recently?
Mm.
No. There's your answer. Like, shark did not bite my arm off. But it's really good to have these conversations where we make it a bit more
Yeah.
normal because like as I said, like it can be quite like a jarring experience when you're by yourself and someone asks you a really bizarre question that you obviously know the answer
Hmm.
to, but you almost can't believe somebody else asked you that question.
Yeah. And the brazenness of them asking that question because deep down, if that was them as individuals with that, they would be mortified if someone asked them that question. But yeah, on the
Yeah.
flip of the coin, they feel it's appropriate to ask those kind of questions.
And that's it. I would honestly love to know where people think that it's appropriate or like it's okay to ask those questions. Because I personally would never go to another disabled person to ask them about if they can be intimate or
Yeah.
not, or if they can do like X, Y, and Z. I mean, if it was my friend, very, very different
Of
situation.
course.
I'd be like, how do you get your leg behind your head? Is that because you're super flexible? But like a stranger on the street, I just don't think it's
Yeah.
appropriate. And I think that's where we've got to, as disabled people, I think sometimes this is where we can come across as being
Yeah.
aggressive when actually we're just standing our
Of
ground
course.
because I don't owe you an explanation for
Hmm.
anything. Like the idea that I do owe you an explanation is literally audacious.
Because we're in a world of social media, so if you're gonna put it out there, then you are bound by the social media police to tell people everything.
Exactly that. Like your life must be shared,
Yes.
explained, your choice is everything as to why you're doing what you're doing. You have no
Yep.
choice. I have only got one final question for
Yeah.
you, and that is, are you disabled and proud?
I'm unique and proud.
Interesting. I've not had that response, but I really rate it. I really rate it because I always say that how we relate to disability and how it impacts our
Yeah.
life and how it is and how it's present is so individual to the individual
Hmm.
person. And for you, it's your
Yeah.
uniqueness. So yes, you're unique and proud, and I love that. I love that spin. It's so good. Thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciated
Thanks for
it,
having me.
and